Hi, I'm Angus Cress Gillespie, Professor of American Studies at Rutgers University, and our show is called Old Ways in New Jersey. Many outsiders see New Jersey as a place of industrialization, pollution, high taxes, and toll roads. But off the main highways are vestiges of the old traditional way of life that we've been showcasing. True, New Jersey's busy and congested, but to find aspects of the old traditional way of life, you have to get off the main highways. Take Milltown, New Jersey, for example. Though it's sandwiched between two main highways, this tiny borough still resembles an old-fashioned small town. Among the small businesses up and down Main Street is an unlikely enterprise. At 119 South Main, you can find the oldest business in Milltown, housed in an early 20th century clapboard storefront with two large display windows. This is the home of Schwendeman's Taxidermy workshop, which was opened back in 1921 by Arthur Schwendeman. Now, traditionally, taxidermy was a secret craft. Taxidermists hoarded information, passing it down strictly from father to son, master to apprentice. They maintained handwritten books with secret recipes and chemical equations, much like a wizard's book of potions. In time, Arthur Schwendeman passed this business along to his son David Schwendeman, who for many years was the last chief taxidermist ever employed by the Museum of Natural History, where he worked for 28 years. Now, David is 85 years old, long retired, and has passed the business along to his son Bruce. Many of us who live in central New Jersey have driven by the Schwendeman studio, and many of us have wondered what goes on in such a place. But one central New Jersey native, Melissa Milgrom, actually stopped in and started asking a whole lot of questions. One thing led to another, and in time, Melissa wrote a book about taxidermy. The book, recently published, has received a great deal of attention, not just here in New Jersey, but nationwide. It's true, taxidermy has a very creepy reputation. Most shops bar visitors from their workshops. But Milgrom works hard to dispel misconceptions. She portrays taxidermists as hardworking naturalists, masters of science, art, and technology, interpreters of nature. Fortunately, I'm here in the studio today with Melissa Milgrom herself. Melissa has written for the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Travel and Leisure, among other publications. She's also produced segments for National Public Radio. She holds a master's degree in American Studies from the University of Pennsylvania. Though she now lives in New York City, it's my pleasure to welcome Melissa Milgrom to East Brunswick today. Melissa, your book, Still Life, Adventures in Taxidermy, has just come out, and it's created quite a buzz. Entertainment Weekly, the brand new issue, describes your book as weird. How would you respond? I mean, that seems like kind of it's nice to be in Entertainment Weekly. It's not so nice to be called weird.
Well, you know, I think when one approaches taxidermy for the first time from the outside, it is weird because it conjures pictures of, especially for Entertainment Weekly, Norman Bates.
Yeah.
And every horror movie uses taxidermy to make a creepy character look really creepy. So that's, you know, the initial exposure. But when you start digging and digging, you realize there's a lot more to it than that.
Well, how long have you been working on this project?
I've been working on this book for a good 7 years because I also started out with the perspective as an outsider looking in that this was weird. And then when I dug in, I realized that Charles Darwin not only did taxidermy, but took taxidermy lessons, and that's what qualified him to be a naturalist aboard the Beagle. Any true naturalist had to know taxidermy. And every great museum began as a collection of dried specimens, but we've become so far removed from that history that we only associate it with weirdness.
Well, I guess in the 19th century, there was a preoccupation with taxonomy, just naming things. The universe seems so big, and somehow we've gotten away from that. We're more interested in the molecular level.
Well, we've done a thorough job of classifying, and taxidermy was the tool that taxonomers used to classify species. And what they did was they would line up birds in rows and compare them by shape. And the people who were interested in artistic taxidermy were outside of the museum, because the museum was for pure science.
I understand that just recently your book was named in the Amazon Top 10. That must have made you feel good.
Oh, I feel great. And I really am happy that so many people are coming to this book with a healthy curiosity and coming away from it saying, wow, I had no idea it was so complicated, or that there was more to taxidermy than stuffing animals.
And I also understand that shortly there's going to be a review forthcoming from the New York Times. So that certainly is a nice imprimatur.
That would be great. We don't
want
until it happens, you know, but that's the rumor.
Yeah. I want to take you back to 1994. I understand you were on safari in Africa. Of course, that's 16 years ago.
Yes.
What happened on that safari? Can you fill us in?
Well, I was on basically a reconnaissance trek with my brother-in-law, safari guide, to scout out new areas, new places to take safaris to. So it was way out of my comfort level. And we were in the middle of nowhere, airlifted in the middle of Tanzania, and out of radio range. In East Africa, out of radio range. We followed a dry riverbed for 10 days. And it took me a long time to become comfortable with nature. But when I finally did become comfortable on the last night, we had run into a group of Belgians who were camping nearby, and they were hunters, because there was only one access point, a dirt landing strip. And I saw their skin pelts, and I was horrified. But that also got my mind working, you know. I was curious, what's going to happen with these skins? Well,
they say that hunters are often the best conservationists, that they're not just bloodthirsty murderers, that they really care about preserving the species.
You know, a lot of them do, because you need animals to hunt, whereas developers don't need animals at all. I mean, and also I would say one thing about taxidermists that I learned is they really don't earn a lot of money. They do it for the love of it. And so even if they wanted to be a big game hunter, they really can't afford it most of the time.
And I think it's kind of interesting. We're here in the studio for East Brunswick Television, and in our neighboring borough, Milltown, there's Schwendermans, which I think everyone within our viewing audience is familiar with.
Everybody knows that shop.
Even if they haven't stopped by, they've certainly driven by. How did you first meet David Schwenderman, and tell us how that happened?
Well, I came back from this safari, and I had this macabre curiosity, and I had to follow that. You know, as a writer, you go where you're not supposed to go.
Yeah.
And I learned about the Schwendemans, and even though I knew that David worked for the Museum of Natural History, but when I walked in the shop, it was like falling into Darwin's study to me, because there are all these skeletons and birds and a lot of beautiful creatures. It wasn't, you know, filled with deer heads. Not that deer heads are not beautiful to some people, but it was more of my own Museum of Natural History. I felt it was a gold mine.
And as a writer, talking to people like David Schwenderman, how do you establish rapport? How do you get their trust?
Well, as an outsider to this world, and well, the Schwendemans are different than other taxidermists because of their relationship to the American Museum of Natural History.
That gives them a certain credential.
That's right. So they're proud of what they do, whereas a lot of taxidermists are sort of embarrassed, or they don't value their craft. So, but still, I hung out a lot. I hung around the studio a lot. I asked a lot of questions. I had to earn everybody's trust. But I was I'm a local person. I grew up in North Brunswick, so my family goes way back, and we're from New Brunswick, so that helps. That helps.
Yeah. Well, in terms of your background, you started out as an undergraduate at Miami University of
Yes.
Ohio, and then later on you did graduate work in American Civilization at the University of Pennsylvania.
Yes.
How did your education prepare you for this?
Well, it really did prepare me because I studied material culture, what objects mean, and how they change through time. I studied museums. My book is largely about museum culture, how museums have changed from the 20s, from the diorama era to the edutainment era when we have robotic dinosaurs and IMAX theaters. But also I studied a lot of ethnography. So how do you begin to study a subculture that you're not part of? And for what I did was I chose 3 strong characters, a hunter, an artist, and a field naturalist that were all, from my perspective, insiders and outsiders. And so I tackled it like any anthropologist would, and a journalist.
Well, for the benefit of our viewers, let's take them up one at a time.
Sure.
Tell us about the hunter first.
Okay. The hunter, Ken Walker, he's a taxidermist living in Alberta, Canada. He's the 3-time world taxidermy champion, and that's how I met him. When I
So
first
they actually
met
have
him,
competitions in.
Oh, they have big competitions, and he does recreations. So he competed with a giant panda, and then I followed him for 3 years. And he also made an extinct Irish elk. He specializes in extinct recreations.
Oh, so he can't hunt an extinct animal. He has to recreate it.
You have to recreate it. So he uses DNA studies. For the Irish elk, he had to look at the Paleolithic cave paintings in France, and he had to create a portrait, much like a paleobiologist would, and then bring it to life.
So this is really more like sculpture than taxidermy.
It's a combination of science and art, and so he's one of the characters.
There's a hunter, there's a scientist?
Well, field naturalists.
Okay.
The Schwendemans I consider to be field naturalists. They're like in the vein of Audubon or Darwin, where they go out in the field and study the creature, and they're interested in the science and the beauty of it. I mean, they're all interested in the beauty of it, but they harken back to the Victorian era more than the other 2.
And how do they get their specimens? Like the
Well, the Schwendemans get their specimens, if they're doing a museum project, there's so many ways to get specimens these days that without killing them, like, well, primate labs, zoos, veterinarians, roadkill. There's a lot of ways you can get a specimen.
without hunting.
Without hunting.
And then and your third major character
Is Emily Mayer, who is a sculptor in England, and she does a method called erosion molding, which is high tech and very different from what the other 2 do. And she also works for a lot of artists such as Damien Hirst.
Erosion molding. What's that?
It's kind of gross, but if you want to know.
Yeah.
An animal carcass is coated in silicone rubber, and the inside of it is rotted away, and what you're left with is the hair embedded into the silicone, so it makes a perfect mount. I mean, if you saw Emily's dogs, her mounted dogs, or they're not mounted, but her sculpted dogs, you have to poke them to see if they're real, because she'll cross the dog's paws and their eyes are shut, and they are so lifelike. Her pets, she's a dog lover, actually curl up with the fake dogs and fall asleep. I mean, they fool real dogs, but she's very gifted, very gifted.
So that goes into one of your concepts of perfection. I mean, that seems to be an obsession with these folks.
It's an obsessive profession. If you really care about the animal, and the best taxidermists love the animal the most, then you have to get it right. You have to bring it back to life, and you can't ever bring it back to life. So
it's a vanishing goal. You can't ever
it's
quite.
It's absurd, but yet they try, and it's because of this love of animals. Or like in the case of Ken Walker and the Irish elk, he wanted to see it as he believed it should be. So even though he has a skeleton from the Smithsonian that he's using for reference, he rearticulates it so that all the pivot points are where he believes they should be.
I understand you tried your hand at this.
I did. I mounted a squirrel. Taxidermists can't stand the word stuffed. You have to say mounted. And the Schwendemans guided me through the process, so I was really fortunate.
And what challenges did you face in that?
Well, it was so difficult. I mean, it was really difficult. first of all, I used the Victorian method. I did everything from scratch because these days, contemporary taxidermists can buy artificial anatomy that is so perfect. Like you could buy a rippled tongue, you could buy fake saliva, you can buy glass eyes with different pupils, depending on if you want to show your animal in the daylight or at night. But we did everything from scratch, the old-fashioned way, and it was really hard because sometimes I would wrap the leg and it would be the arm, or I have to redo it, and it was really hard, much harder than I ever expected.
In your opinion, like for the average person, what's a good place to get a taste of all this?
Oh, the American Museum of Natural History, African Hall, and also North American mammals. Those dioramas are so beautiful, and I'm so glad the museum recognizes and cherishes those dioramas.
When were they done?
Well, in the 20s and 30s, and even up until the 40s and 50s.
And I understand that not all museums cherish their heritage. You were telling me about the Smithsonian.
Well, the thing is, museums have to change with the times. And the Smithsonian built a new mammal hall in 2003. And unfortunately, they didn't have enough space to do a new mammal hall and an old mammal hall. So they had to dismantle their old dioramas to make room for the new hall.
What happened to the specimens?
Well, the specimens were taken to a warehouse, and some were given away to other organizations. A few historic mounts were put into storage, and the rest were broken down into like swatches of skin for their DNA collections. And the dioramas were not saved at all, and neither was the blue whale model.
They were just thrown out?
That's what I've heard. Yeah, I mean, well, the specimens definitely were taken apart.
Tell me a little more about Damien Hirst.
Damien is one of Emily's clients, and I attended a Tate opening of one of Damien's shows, and I was able to sit down and talk with him about taxidermy. And I'm not an art critic, but one thing I've learned through this book is that it's wonderful to view Damien Hirst through the eyes of British natural history. Nobody seems to be looking at his work from that perspective. And if you do, you can see a direct correlation between him, and I wrote a chapter on Mr. Potter's Museum of Curiosities. And in the Victorian era, people loved to shock and surprise people with nature. It wasn't so didactic and spoon-fed like we have today. There was more this element of wonder and surprise. And that's what I see in Damien's work.
I see. Going back in time, I know my mother was always fascinated with Audubon. He was born in Haiti, and then his skill was painting these birds from nature. But was he involved with taxidermy? He
was a taxidermist at a museum in Cincinnati for a little while. He also shot and preserved thousands of birds so he could have a lifelike model for his illustrations.
Oh, I didn't know that. So he actually was a hunter as well as an illustrator.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I believe I read somewhere that he considered it a bad day if he didn't shoot 100 birds, and the number might be higher than that.
Wow. Melissa, not long ago, I had the opportunity to go to Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's house in Charlottesville, Virginia, and I was struck when I walked in the front door and turned around, there was a mounted buffalo head. And it struck me, I wasn't thinking about taxidermy at the time, but I was thinking this showed Thomas Jefferson's preoccupation with the West. After all, it was Thomas Jefferson who authorized the expedition out west of exploration.
Did. Right, the Lewis and Clark expedition.
Yeah.
Well, because in Europe, naturalists were putting forth the theory that animals shrank in the New World. And Thomas Jefferson wanted to prove that's not true.
That they were bigger.
Yes. Yeah. So that's part of the reason for that expedition was to disprove that claim.
And then there's, I don't know, this free association, Thomas Wilson Peale, the exhuming of the mastodon. Did you touch on that?
Well, the first natural history museum in our country was Peale's, and you can still visit the Philosophical Society in Philadelphia and learn about that museum, because that's where it was located. And he was also a pioneering taxidermist. And he also believed that museums should be organized, whereas before it was just a hodgepodge, a curiosity cabinet. Although even though his museum was organized, he had some pretty fun exhibits there.
I understand, like, museums aren't really putting up new halls of African mammals, halls of North American mammals. The museums are going in more for IMAX theaters and robotic displays. So the outlet, as I understand, is in competitions nowadays for taxidermists to show off their work.
Right. I mean, the American Museum of Natural History will create a diorama once in a while for an exhibition, but for the most part, but they don't have a taxidermy workshop anymore. That closed a long time ago, and most of our museums no longer have taxidermy workshops. So taxidermists are often have to compete in these competitions to show the artistry of their work, and that also happened in the 1800s before museums wanted artistic taxidermy.
And if museums aren't purchasing this, somebody must be. Are there collectors out there?
Well, there's lots of little groups. I mean, of course, hunters have always wanted trophies for their trophy room. Oh, and this is another little fact, tangentially related. One thing I learned, the difference between a specimen and a trophy. A specimen is the exact animal, like that zebra, where a trophy could be any zebra. Just a side note. And then there are collectors, and there are young urban hipsters who just want these things around them.
Oh, perhaps for their shock value even.
Yeah, I mean, the shock of nature, just wanting, in a world that's so digital, where everything is instantaneous, like on a computer, and you can replicate images, this is the complete opposite. This is tactile, this is one of a kind. This is a little horrific sometimes.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit more about this Mr. Potter's Museum of Curiosity.
Well, that was a wonderful collection, and it was very sad to see it broken up. Potter was a Victorian taxidermist who, much in the vein of Beatrix Potter, no relation, would create these mind-boggling humanistic scenes, like kittens dressed as brides and athletic toads and guinea pigs playing cricket. And they all poked fun at Victorian society. They sort of mocked and mimicked it. And this was a national treasure for years until 2003 when it was auctioned off.
Huh. And nobody was visiting anymore, or it wasn't profitable.
People were visiting, but the collection had been moved a couple times in its history, and now it was at the Jamaica Inn that was made famous by Daphne du Maurier's novel, The Jamaica Inn, which added like this other layer of intrigue. And the owners whose collection this was, or who bought it to save it from a similar fate, were retiring. And the new generation wanted to use the space for bedrooms, more bedrooms, and like a wedding facility. And they appreciated the taxidermy, and they tried to sell it they were hoping to sell it to the V&A or the British Museum, but nobody came forth with an offer.
Yeah. In your discussions with the Schwenderman family, I understand that what the grandmother was doing the skinning, and
Lillian, what a character!
And that she lived to a very old age.
I wish I had met her.
And there's a hypothesis that the exposure to arsenic helped her longevity.
Well, the Schwendermans joke around, like a lot of taxidermists defend their profession no matter what, to the point of saying that arsenic, a deadly carcinogen, can have some benefit. And Lillian was a skinner, so she was exposed to lots of arsenic, and which is a preservative and insect repellent. And she lived to 92, and up until she died, she was up on the roof scraping ice off, and she marched in every Milltown parade. I really wish that I had met her.
Well, Melissa, this has been a real pleasure because your book is attracting national interest, but we have a local hook. We have
I know.
We have Schwenderman's right here in Milltown.
It's such a treasure to have Schwenderman's Taxidermy Studio that's still around and does such great work.
So perhaps we should encourage our viewers to drop by and say hello.
That's right, and call first.
Oh, because they're not always open, right?
No, they're open, but you should go by and visit Schwenderman's Taxidermy Studio. It's like having your own natural history museum right here in New Jersey.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It's been my pleasure.